The morning I found out my best friend had been sleeping with my husband, I was standing in my own kitchen making her coffee. That detail still gets me, even now, even after everything that followed. I was stirring her oat milk latte with the little spoon she always asked for, the one with the twisted handle I'd picked up at a flea market years ago, and my phone buzzed against the counter with a text from a number I didn't recognize. 11 words. A screenshot of a message thread. I read it once and understood it completely. The way you understand something your body has already known for a while before your mind catches up. I didn't cry. I didn't make a sound. I set the spoon down very carefully on the counter, the way you set something down when your hands have gone slightly numb, and I stood there in the quiet of my own kitchen understanding that the two people I had built my entire world around had been quietly taking it apart behind my back for God knows how long. What happened next isn't the story you'd expect from a woman in that moment. There was no explosion. No dramatic confrontation in the living room, no moment where I threw things or came apart on the floor. What happened instead was slower and colder, and in the end far more complete than anything my anger could have built on its own. This is the story of how a woman who spent her whole life making things comfortable for everyone else finally stopped, and what happened to the people who had been counting on her not to. My name is Claire Merritt. And at 36, I was a woman who had made a quiet art of disappearing into other people's lives. I'm a landscape architect by profession, which means I spend my days designing spaces where people can breathe, where there's room for things to grow and light to come in at the right angles. And I was spectacularly, almost comically bad at applying any of that philosophy to my own life. I had a deep gift for making things beautiful for everyone but myself. My husband Daniel was a commercial contractor, charming in the particular way of men who have always needed things from people, and learned early how to get them. He was quick with a laugh, easy in a room, the kind of man strangers liked immediately, and for 7 years I had loved him in the complete, slightly self-erasing way that I now understand was my particular vulnerability. I gave him everything, and I gave it freely, and I told myself that was what love looked like. Jenna Walsh had been my closest friend since our second year of graduate school. She was loud and magnetic, and always slightly the center of whatever room she walked into, the kind of woman who made everything feel like an event just by showing up. I had spent 12 years being quietly grateful that she wanted to be around someone as steady and unflashy as me. That particular brand of gratitude I was about to learn had made me very easy to take from. When you're grateful someone chose you, you stop asking what they might be choosing you for. The text came from a number I still don't know, just a screenshot. 3 lines of a message thread between Daniel and Jenna that no amount of creative interpretation could have made innocent. I stood in the kitchen for what felt like a long time. I thought about what a different woman might do. The version of this story where I walk into the living room and say her name and watch her face change. That woman existed somewhere in me, but something had gone very still underneath the shock. The way water goes still right before it freezes. And the still part knew that walking into the living room and burning everything down in the next 5 minutes was the version of this that benefited the least. I put the latte on the counter. I walked to the front door and told Jenna it was ready. I watched her smile at me from the couch, warm and easy and completely unguarded, and something inside me that had been pointed toward her for 12 years simply closed, quietly, like a door you don't slam, because you don't want anyone to hear it. I smiled back. I excused myself to the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub for 4 minutes, just breathing. Then I went back out and we talked about her upcoming gallery show for another hour, and I was completely normal. And when she left, I hugged her at the door the way I always had, and I did not let a single thing show. It was the best performance of my life and nobody saw it, and that was exactly the point. That night I called my sister Rachel, who is the most practically minded person I have ever known, and the only one I fully trusted with something this sharp. I told her everything, the text, the screenshot, the hour on the couch pretending nothing had changed. She was quiet for a long moment when I finished, the particular quiet of someone choosing their words, because they know the words are going to matter. Then she said the thing that reoriented everything. She said, "Claire, before you do a single thing, you need to know what you actually have, not what you feel, not what you think. What you actually legally, financially have." I didn't entirely understand her yet. I would. Here is what you need to know about the life Daniel and I had built, because the betrayal didn't stop at the personal level, and understanding why it didn't is what makes the rest of this make sense. 3 years before that October morning, I had used the bulk of my inheritance, money left to me by my grandfather that I had been carefully saving since my early 20s, to purchase a historic property outside of town, a Victorian farmhouse on 2 acres, slightly rambling, full of original details that had survived 100 years of people living and changing inside them. The plan was to renovate it together, Daniel handling the structural contracting work, me handling every element of design, and eventually open it as a small bed and breakfast we'd run ourselves. The renovation was nearly finished by the time I stood in that kitchen. The business plan was something I had spent 2 years building from scratch, vendor by vendor, permit by permit, design decision by design decision. Every relationship with every supplier, every aesthetic choice, every landscape element on those 2 acres lived in my files and in my head because I had put it there myself. Daniel was the contractor. I was everything else. What I did not know, because I had trusted him the way you trust someone you believe is genuinely your partner, was that Daniel had been leveraging the property without telling me, taking out loans against it, using the business we were supposedly building together as collateral, accumulating debt I had not signed for and was not aware of. When I eventually found out where the money had gone, the picture it painted was not subtle. Some of it had funded a version of Daniel's life that looked considerably more generous and impressive than the one we actually shared. A version, it turned out, that he had been performing for Jenna. I did not confront him. I know how that sounds. I know the impulse because I felt it every single day for the first 2 weeks. The burning need to walk into a room and say I know and watch the ground shift under someone else's feet for once. But Rachel's words had landed somewhere important in me, and I kept coming back to them. Know what you actually have. The moment you show what you know, you stop being the one holding it. So instead of confronting anyone, I got very quiet and very organized, which, if the people around me had been paying closer attention, they might have recognized as the more dangerous version of me. I found a forensic accountant named Sandra Yee through a contact of Rachel's, a small and precise woman who looked at financial records the way a surgeon looks at tissue under a lens, identifying exactly what was healthy and exactly what wasn't, and where the damage had originated. I sat in her office on 3 separate Tuesday afternoons while Daniel assumed I was meeting with a materials supplier, and I handed her every document I could access. Bank records, property filings, contractor invoices, partnership agreements. She went through all of it without expression, made her notes, and called me when she was ready. What she found was not small, and it was not simple. Daniel had borrowed against the property 4 separate times without my signature, which was legally possible due to a structural gap in the original paperwork, a detail my attorney at the time should have caught and did not. The cumulative debt was significant enough to materially threaten the property's equity, which was primarily my equity, built from money I had saved since I was 22 years old. And then there was the detail that changed the shape of everything. One of the loans had a co-signer, a name I did not recognize at first, that resolved itself within 24 hours into someone I recognized completely. Jenna had not just been sleeping with my husband. She had been going into business with him. She had co-signed a loan on a property I owned for a business plan I had built, toward a future that the 2 of them apparently had some version of mapped out. A version that, as far as I could tell from the documents Sandra laid out in front of me, did not include me in it at all. I remember driving home from Sandra's office after that 3rd Tuesday meeting, and sitting in my car in the driveway of the house on Linden Street, looking at the front door and feeling something happen in my chest that I can only describe as structural, like a wall that had been bearing too much weight for too long, finally deciding to redistribute the load. I was not angry in that moment. I was something quieter and more durable. I was resolved, and those 2 things feel nothing alike. Anger burns fast and wastes resources. What I felt was cold and precise and knew exactly where it needed to go. I contacted an attorney named Patricia Howe, who had been recommended to me as someone who specialized in complex property and marital asset disputes, and who had a reputation for being exceptionally thorough. She was 60 years old, silver-haired, with the affect of a woman who has heard every version of every story and has long since stopped being surprised by any of them. I sat across from her and laid out what Sandra had documented, and I watched Patricia read the report without expression, turning pages at a steady pace. When she finished, she set it down and looked at me and said the same thing Rachel had said, but from a different direction. She said, "You have considerably more than you may realize. The unauthorized loans, the co-signature on a marital asset, the financial activity conducted without spousal knowledge or consent. It created a legal picture that she described, with characteristic understatement, as comprehensive. Then she asked me the question that mattered most. She asked what outcome I was actually working toward, not what I was angry about, what I wanted. I told her I wanted the property, not half of it, not a negotiated share of it, the property, because it had been built on my money and my work and my design and my relationships, and because Daniel and Jenna's plan to have it was not going to succeed. She made a note on her legal pad, looked up at me, and said, "Let's get to work." What I did not do during any of this period was tell anyone outside of Rachel and my 2 attorneys, not my friends, because several of them moved in the same circles as Jenna, and the information would have traveled. Not my parents, because my mother loved Daniel and would have called him within a day. I kept showing up to the dinners where Jenna was present. I kept texting Daniel about tile deliveries and fixture decisions for the property. I performed the life I was supposed to be living with a consistency that I think genuinely surprised even me, and I want to be honest about where that consistency came from. It didn't come from strategy, not primarily. It came from grief. The specific kind of grief that goes very deep and very still. And the only thing you can do with that kind of grief, the only productive thing, is give it somewhere to go. I gave it to Patricia and Sandra, and they gave it structure. The divorce filing was the first thing Daniel knew that the world had changed. Patricia advised me to file before I said a word to him directly, to establish the legal record before he had the opportunity to restructure anything or move assets into configurations that would complicate the picture Sandra had already mapped. So on a Thursday morning in October, while Daniel was on a job site in the next county, the papers were served. He called me 11 minutes later. I watched his name on my phone screen for a long moment, feeling the ghost of the old reflex. The part of me that had spent 7 years answering immediately, that had been trained by its own habits to smooth things over before they could roughen. I let it ring. I had Patricia return his call instead. The conversation with Jenna I chose myself. I chose the timing and the location, and the exact shape of what I was going to say, because it was the one moment in all of this that belonged entirely to me, and I wanted it to be precise. I asked her to meet me at the Victorian property on a Saturday morning, telling her I needed a second opinion on the East Garden design, which was true in its way. She came without hesitation, because she believed I still knew nothing, and because Jenna, even in the middle of everything she had been doing, could not resist being the person someone turned to. We walked the East Garden together in the morning light, and I talked about the planting plan, the placement of the stone path, where the climbing roses would go along the back fence. She was warm and engaged and fully herself, and I let her be because I wanted her to be comfortable right up until the moment I needed her not to be. Then I stopped walking and turned to look at her, and I said, without any elevation in my voice at all, "I know about everything, Jenna. The loans, your signature, all of it." I watched her face move through several expressions too quickly for any of them to settle. And then I said the sentence I had been carrying for 3 months, the one I had written and rewritten in my head until it was exactly right. "I'm not here to fight with you. I'm here to show you what I built, because it's the last time you're going to see it." I don't know what she had imagined this moment would look like. What she got was me, standing in the garden I had designed on the land I was going to keep, completely steady. Then I told her my attorney would be in touch regarding her co-signature, which carried more legal exposure than she had apparently anticipated, and I walked back to my car and I drove home and I did not look back at her once. The legal process took 7 months, and there were days it was genuinely exhausting in the way that the formal dissolution of a life you built tends to be. Daniel hired 2 different attorneys, the first of whom withdrew from the case, which communicated something without either of us having to say it. He made claims and counterclaims, accused me of asset concealment, challenged the property valuation, tried every angle that I can only assume he and Jenna had strategized together in whatever version of their future they'd been planning. But Sandra's documentation was airtight, and Patricia was methodical in a way that left nothing exposed. The co-signature drew Jenna into proceedings she had not planned on joining, which changed the financial calculus for all of them in ways that made settlement considerably more appealing to Daniel's side than continued litigation. Patricia negotiated with the same absence of theater she brought to everything. She presented the record, document by document, fact by fact, and the record was exceptionally clean because I had spent my entire professional life creating paper trails, and I had done it instinctively here too. Every design decision documented, Every vendor relationship established in my name. Every permit, every contract, every correspondence. Daniel had been the contractor. I had been the architect of everything else, in every sense of the word, and the paper made that unmistakably clear. The settlement gave me the property free and clear. Daniel's share was surrendered to resolve the debt he had created against it. The legal fees consumed the money he had been moving into separate accounts in the months before I filed. The contractor relationships he had hoped to carry forward, relationships built on my designs, and my vendor history and my professional reputation, did not follow him. He ended up in a position considerably more precarious than where he had started, and he had arrived there by the precise application of his own choices, which is not cruelty. It is just arithmetic. Jenna's posts about our friendship disappeared gradually over the following months, one by one. The curated photographs and the long captions about chosen family quietly removed as though the algorithm of her own life were processing what had happened. I noticed without ceremony. I felt less than I expected to, which told me the grief had gone where it needed to go and done what it needed to do. The bed and breakfast opened the following June. Every vendor was there. Every design element I had planned was in place. Every landscape feature on those 2 acres was exactly what I had drawn on paper 3 years earlier, because all of it had been mine to begin with, and had remained mine throughout. Rachel came for the opening weekend, and we sat on the east porch in the evening, in the garden where I had last seen Jenna standing alone, and the light came through the oaks at the angle I had specifically designed it to come through, and it was extraordinary in the quiet way that things you have genuinely earned tend to be extraordinary. The thing I keep coming back to, the thing that feels most true when I look at all of it from where I'm standing now, is that the outcome was never really something I built. I didn't construct a trap. I just stopped dismantling the one that already existed. My entire life I had been the person who absorbed the cost of other people's choices, who smoothed the rough landings, who gave the room permission to relax by folding first. The pull to do it again was there every day for the first 2 months. To call Daniel, to find some gentler version of events that let everyone off more easily, to be, one more time, the woman who made it comfortable. I recognized that pull for what it was, a reflex so old it had become indistinguishable from instinct, and I chose differently. I let the document speak. I let the record be exactly what it was. I let the law carry what I had spent years carrying manually for people who had not been carrying anything for me. The East Garden is something to see in the early morning, the light coming in low and the roses just beginning their 2nd year on the fence. I walk it most mornings before the guests are up. Just the sound of the property settling into the day, and I feel the particular satisfaction of a woman standing in a space she designed herself. On ground she chose herself, in a life she built herself, that no one is measuring for resale. I don't owe anyone an explanation for keeping what I made. The door isn't locked against people who want to come back kindly, but it's my door. I'll decide who I open it for now, which, it turns out, was all I ever needed to do.